Hello, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Today is October 26, 2025. My name is Catherine Jones, and this is my Coming to the Path talk. Like in Master Hackwan's line, in going and returning, I never leave home, my wayfinding has been a lifelong process with much geographical and chronological going and returning. By way of introduction, here are some basic facts about my life. I was born in Vancouver in the province of British Columbia, Canada, in 1948. That makes me 77 years old, a solid member of the boomer generation, along with a few of your grandparents and probably several of your parents. Long ago, when I could hardly imagine old age, I read a book by Malcolm Cowley called The View from 80. One of his recommendations to young people was to smear your glasses with Vaseline and see how the world looks with age-related failing vision. Shockingly, I'm almost there now. Though I'm delighted to report, I believe my eyesight and a few other functions are marginally better than he suggested I could reasonably expect at this point. But, to quote the House of Stark motto from Game of Thrones, winter is coming. I came late in my 50s to RZC. As envious as I was of the trainees here when I first came to the workshop and began to practice, that direct path was not to be for me. I consider myself very much a lay practitioner with nevertheless an abiding aspiration to wake up as an unfolding, deepening, and ever ongoing practice. Currently, I live in Bellingham, Washington, where I moved 2 years ago after the death of my husband of some 53 years. I'm surrounded by mountains in view of the ocean and close to two of my middle-aged children on whom I likely will be more dependent as time goes on. Nearby is a Zen center in the Suzuki Roshi San Francisco lineage called, coincidentally, RCZC, Red Cedar Zen Center, and I am grateful to be able to sit with this group and participate in some of their programs. This month, I've had the enormous privilege of returning to Rochester, my previous home of 50 years, and living and working in the training program here at RZC. For my talk today, I'll offer selected memories from amongst the myriad causes and conditions that brought me to Zen or Zen to me, and subsequently to this spot here today. It's been a challenge to forge anything coherent out of the boundless experiences of a lifetime. So this is just a not very coherent story, one amongst any number that could be told. I hope that it'll convey some of the flavor of my journey, and by the end of it, you'll know me a little bit better. I'll be describing some photographs by way of bringing glimpses of biographical material into the account that follows. In fact, sorting through a box of old pictures, the kind on paper, was an aid in recovering moments in the arc of my life worth pondering. Here we go. Photo number 1 was taken before I was born. It has that soft brownish tone of the professional photography of the 40s. It's a wedding photo of my parents, surrounded by their friends, and was taken at their reception in the front room of my grandmother's house in Vancouver, Canada. They were side by side, cutting their wedding cake. My mother is looking up at the camera in her white gown and veil. Her face is a little overexposed. My father has a shy look, eyes cast down. They are not much older than my grandchildren are today. These were the parents I loved all their lives. They gave me the gift of this miraculous life. My father and mother dated in high school and married shortly after World War II ended. He was an Air Force veteran who returned to university in Vancouver, where he studied engineering. My mother, who'd worked in Washington, D.C. during the war at an aeronautics factory, became a homemaker and very soon the mother of me. Their own families of origin were all Vancouverites, as were their friends, an intimate and supportive local network. They were the young adult post-war generation, generous, fun-loving, full of relief that the war was over, hopeful and mostly financially hard up. In the picture, they are celebrating, apparently having a very good time, and they're all drinking. Not surprising, this is a wedding reception. But these were mostly recent war veterans. Many had lost family members and friends. Most had had experiences they never wanted to talk about. They partied hard for mixed reasons. Those so predisposed became addicts. I'm commenting on this detail now because the hardship experienced by families of alcoholics has played some part in my coming to the path story. That thread will resurface later. There's no photo of this next memory glimpse. I include it because it is truly my first and very early. The details were confirmed later by my mother. Here it is. I'm standing up in a baby crib, clutching the rail and bellowing in a state of existential terror. I was a few months short of 2 and alone at night, awake and wailing. For what? I didn't know anything then beyond physical and emotional sensations, but I recall an acute sense of fear, amplified by my own screaming. Perhaps I had absorbed the state of emergency in the household, because on that night my mother, 7 months pregnant with twins, developed the life-threatening disorder known as preeclampsia. She was hospitalized and delivered the babies prematurely. They were tiny, incubated, and not expected to live. I now believe that it was out of necessity that I was left alone on that night, and for the first time consciously experienced the universal trauma of separation. I became a self. I have a PS here. My twin brothers did survive and eventually thrived. They're in their 70s now. One has had a stroke and the other has cancer. When one of them commented that they both are likely to be the first amongst our 6 siblings to die, the other one responded, "That's okay. We weren't supposed to survive even one day." My second photo is black and white, a small format, probably taken with one of those early box cameras called Brownies that you can see at the Eastman Museum. It was taken in Calgary, Alberta, on what appears to be an early spring day. Here is a little girl in a snowsuit, sitting in a sea of mud. She's smiling, looking gleeful, and this is the context. Not long after the birth and stabilization of my twin brothers, our family moved eastwards to Calgary, where my father had found his first job. This was the early 50s. We lived in a tiny, newly built tract house amidst others on what had very recently been a farmer's field. There were no lawns, no landscaping, only snow and mud. For my parents, there was too little money, no car, and suddenly no helpful friends or relatives anywhere nearby. My mother was distracted and overwhelmed with the work generated by caring for 3 babies, virtually alone. Washing diapers in a Wringer washing machine that danced across the kitchen floor and hanging dozens of them out to freeze dry on a clothesline was only one of her daily tasks. A memory of mine from that time is of sitting in the mud behind the house where just about every day I was sent out to play. I don't recall any misery in the experience, though I was probably wet and cold. Just a feeling of novelty and interest. What, you may be thinking, does this have to do with anything? Well, what I can observe now about that memory is that much later in life, I took up pottery, where I experienced the same innocent joy of hands in cool mud and flashed back to those Calgary mud pies. Making pots eventually led to studying Japanese potters and the ancient kilns of Japan. An appreciation for Japanese aesthetics stimulated curiosity and interest in Japanese culture. I went to Japan, where I admired Shinto shrines, Buddhist temples and gardens, and Japanese art long before I came to Zen. Important for coming to the path? Who knows? But it's interesting to pull on these memory threads and see, with hindsight, some surprising connections revealed. Just a glimpse, maybe, of a pattern beyond our understanding. Skipping ahead, this little family subsequently moved back to Vancouver, where another brother was born, then on to Edmonton for a year and the birth of brother number 4. We ricocheted back to Vancouver again, and after just a couple of years on to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Snapshot number 3 is a color photo, date stamped from the early 60s, a bit bigger with a 4x6 vertical format. It's a posed, special occasion shot of an awkward-looking girl with short reddish hair. She's dressed all in white, a short-sleeved blouse and a box-pleated skirt, nylon stockings, and flat white party shoes. She's smiling for the camera and looks both tentative and excited. Preceding that photo, I had made a serious plunge into Anglicanism, the Canadian Church of England, that I had been born and christened into. I took a course of instructions culminating in a First Communion as that girl in the photo, the awkward 13-year-old dressed all in white. Kneeling at the altar in front of the congregation, I ate the body in the form of a wafer and drank the blood, a sip of wine, of my Savior, Jesus Christ. However, as ardently as I had prayed for it, the promised salvation was elusive and ungraspable. Nothing happened. I was persistent, though. One of my first completely independent initiatives was to attend weekly 6 a.m. communion services on my own, and that entailed walking a mile along icy sidewalks in the dark and bitterly cold of Winnipeg winter. The silence, the prayer, the select group of communicants, the ritualized words and gestures. It was all very special and very consoling to me. I kept it up, encouraged by the woman who ran this program, the first woman I had seen in a position of power amongst the otherwise entirely male clergy. She seemed wise, kind, and approachable. I fell in love with the liturgy and the language of the King James Bible. I especially love the Psalms, the 23rd in particular, and committed it to memory along with the Nicene Creed, the fundamental belief statement of all Anglicans. Although we continued to attend this church as a family, it wasn't long after my ceremony and that winter of early morning communions that I came to understand that one of the church clergymen was a predator and had assaulted children in the youth group. Nothing at all was said publicly, but much was whispered, and quite suddenly he disappeared. It was an institutional betrayal of the kind that Rebecca Gilbert described in her talk, and for which I had no name at the time. But it did leave scars of cynicism that I carried for years about hypocrisy in institutionalized religion. I was a sensitive and self-conscious young teen at the edge of puberty. My parents, brave but inadequately dealing with the financial and logistical challenges of the life they were making, and doubtless just seeking some relief, were doing more drinking than they ever had, which meant ever more violent and scary fighting between them, as well as general dysfunction at home. Once again, a newcomer at school, I was socially inept in public and isolated with my family in my role as big sister caregiver for my now 4 younger brothers and baby sister. Over the years, I've had therapists who have helped me gain perspective on my family of origin, and in particular, my psychobiography, the dynamics at work in my particular version of a difficult childhood. Although they did the best they could, my birth family became an alcoholic family as my parents sunk deeper into that addiction over the course of my teenage years. My developmentally challenged twin brothers, the next 2 younger ones, and a baby sister born when I was 15, there were now 6 of us, together with increasingly absent and financially strapped parents, and I might add my gender, placed me squarely in the role of substitute caregiver as was normal for the culture of my place and time. I experienced confusion, resentment, and the ever-present painful self-consciousness. So, layered on the ethical failure of my church, I was experiencing the devastating effects of witnessing my parents disappear into addiction. I was beginning to be profoundly disappointed in the way things seemed to be. And the way things seemed to be consisted of bad stuff going on at church, cliques at school, fetishized items of clothing and makeup we coveted and occasionally shoplifted, romance comic books, the hit parade, and a sometimes terrifying home life. Just at that precarious point in my young life, I had an insight. Lingering with a good friend at the end of our long walk home from school, our books and clipboards clutched to our chests, shivering in the cold, we were always freezing in Winnipeg's winters, we confided to one another our mutual conviction that there absolutely had to be something beyond what our life to date had revealed, something mysterious, something unknown, something unnameable, something to know beyond knowing, and something that we could and we would eventually come to encounter. This moment, this simple, intuitive, and hopeful insight, shared and confirmed face to face with another, felt more authentic and more reassuring than anything else in the life I knew then. It became a kind of underground and sustaining conviction of my subsequent teenage years, along with the question it implied, what is it? And it set me searching. Snapshot number 5 is a color snapshot. This one a little out of focus and not well cropped. This girl is sitting alone by a crowded swimming pool, apparently absorbed in a very thick and water-warped paperback book. When I look back, I see myself searching for that something to know through various modalities on offer by the zeitgeist of the time. Pulled into the hippie culture blooming in my generation, I was more and more out of sync with my parents' expectations. It was 1963. The civil rights movement exploded. JFK was assassinated in November, and the war in Vietnam escalated. Canadian young people were somewhat insulated, but nevertheless aware and politically galvanized by these events. Bob Dylan's "The Times They Are A-Changin'" resonated with us all, especially the words aimed at parents. Come mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you don't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old world is rapidly aging. Be grateful I didn't sing it. Those lines have universal relevance for the coming of age moment, and back then they helped inspire revolution. My rebelliousness and resentments were both confirmed and vindicated by those words, and countless others in the protest music of the times. But I didn't run away to San Francisco. Instead, I sat by a community swimming pool just about every day for a whole summer school vacation as a 15-year-old. My parents thought I was joining in the fun for a change, doing something wholesome. In fact, I was wrestling my way through Jean-Paul Sartre's Being in Nothingness. This was beyond their comprehension, and mine too, if I recall. They were appalled. But this was my rebellion. I was still socially isolated, now plunging more deeply into an interior life and beginning to value intellectual endeavor as the most promising way to cope with the conditions of life as I knew it then. My family continued to move eastwards from province to province in Canada. The next stop was Toronto and then Montreal. In those days, there was no unified sequence in the high school curriculum between provinces. So by the time we landed in Quebec, my education was seriously messed up. I was a senior with no coherent sequence, especially in math and science. Somehow, I was able to gain admission to university, and persistently interested in the life of the mind, I dove into a strenuous major in English literature at Concordia University in Montreal. It was heady times, the late 60s. By age 17, I had managed to leave home and was living with roommates in a flat in downtown Montreal. Some amongst my young professors and friends would go on to become the cultural icons of our time. Margaret Atwood was one of my teachers. Leonard Cohen was scribbling away at the bistro around the corner. My reading, outside the required Chaucer, Shakespeare, and English novels on the assigned course list, might be familiar to some of the elders here today. James Fraser, Mircea Eliade, Northrop Frye, Carl Jung, Eric Hoffer, Thomas Pynchon, the visionary Marshall McLuhan, Jack Kerouac, Gary Snyder and the Beats, Simone de Beauvoir and the Existentialists, Bachelard and the Phenomenologists, Betty Friedan and the Second Wave Feminists. Anything that touched into that persistent intuition, also a question that there was something to encounter beyond what I knew. Photo number 5 is another wedding photo. This one is a small square Polaroid image with poor resolution and thick cardboard margins. It's myself and my new husband cutting our cake at the U of R Faculty Club, where we were married. We didn't have a church setting, a commercial photographer, or a proper tiered cake, but we look as nervous and as joyful as I recall we were on that day. And yes, it's 25 years later and a repeat. I met my husband-to-be while still an undergraduate. Our meeting was one of those unlikely and uncanny coincidences that, recalling the pathfinding journey, turns up. He was an intellectual and an academic, qualities I deeply respected. I introduced him to my large and rambunctious family, something as a divorced man he craved. We were both confirmed atheists and socially very liberal. We wanted books, travel, and a house full of children. We formed a partnership that lasted over 50 years until he died in 2022. Here's where geography comes in. If I hadn't crossed the continent to arrive at that college in Montreal, I wouldn't have met him. And although I had never heard of Rochester, New York, this was where he already had his established career. So our marriage brought me here. We bought a house less than 2 miles from Arnold Park. Circumstances were conspiring. We were married when I graduated in 1969 and immediately departed for England on his year's leave from his position as a professor at the University of Rochester. Our first daughter was born there. Once returned, I started a PhD program in English literature, also at the U of R. That didn't work out too well. Quite quickly, life became way too complicated and way too busy. I already had one baby and another on the way. Unconsciously, I was recreating the hardships and dilemmas my mother had faced with too many babies too early into adult life. My husband's world involved a heavy load of commitments to social activities and travel, for which he expected I would be at his side. I was a conscientious mother, wife, and student, but overwhelmed with the workload of 2 babies, along with the program's requirement to be a full-time student. My deep dive into English literature wasn't connecting with the challenges I was having managing my life, or indeed with the political and social problems at a boil in the early 70s. With a couple of years of coursework completed, I simply couldn't go on and collapsed into what was once called a nervous breakdown. I was clinically depressed and suicidal at 22. It was a serious break, but I recovered, fortunately, and in the years between then and finding Zen in my 50s, I did many things. I raised 4 children and lent a hand with my stepdaughter. I traveled with my husband and children and lived abroad for years at a time in Australia, England, Sweden, and Japan. I finished my degree in the Ed School at the U of R and taught high school at Edison Tech and Thomas Jefferson High School here in the city. I ran a small business in Vancouver, simultaneously helping my dad care for my mother, who was dying of cancer, while I commuted back and forth to Rochester. After I sold the business and returned here full-time, I took care of my mother-in-law through her final illness and death. In the midst of all this, there were holiday celebrations, birthdays, house guests, and dinner parties. The kids went off to college. When there was time, I painted and made pots, hobbies that sustained me still. My marriage was solid, based on deep complementarity in our outlooks. My husband had a distinguished academic career and was a gentle and caring person and a truly great father. Our family life together was full and brimming. But at a deeper level, I was endlessly circling the six worlds. I often felt like I was living a fake life. There was something missing, not trivial, more like a yawning dark abyss. I was afraid to look into it and terrified of becoming depressed again if I did. The illnesses and deaths of my husband's parents and my mother cast troubling shadows. Whatever reckoning we did in the way of grieving their lives and commemorating their deaths and grieving their deaths and commemorating their lives seemed inadequate in the face of the enormity of the passing out of this life of these beloved people. There was a shapelessness and a sense of futility. I saw myself at the end of this precious life, precious and finite life, with so very much still unresolved. I tried to pray, but simply couldn't do God and the belief requirements of the Christian church I had inherited. I knew of no alternative that might fill the gap. I suffered my spiritual dryness with stoicism. Periodically and inevitably, I would become depressed and reclusive, always recovering through a sheer act of will. It was during one of these low spells that I mustered the courage to call the Zen Center about coming in for meditation. Those of us that have suffered depression will recognize the hopelessness that is the fundamental no-exit message inherent in that condition. So calling the center and asking indirectly for help was an impulse beyond explanation. I simply can't say what moved me to do that. I knew next to nothing about Zen, and although I was aware that the center existed nearby, I knew nothing at all of its institutional history or its teachings. I just knew it was there. This brings me to the final photo. It's in color, backlit on a screen, a horizontal format to capture one of the first sessions at Chapin Mill. It was a large group, and here we all are, assembled on the courtyard porch, joyfully commemorating that historic moment. This picture was posted on our RZC website for a long time and always took me back to one of my first and most memorable sessions. As it has been for so many, the initial workshop I attended a couple of years before that session was seismic, a revelation. The talks hit home like an arrow in a bullseye. The rhythm of the mokujo, the words of the chants, these moved me to tears, as they still do today. Here was a whole community of people engaged deeply and directly in the questioning, as I had been doing consciously or unconsciously for some 40 years. Here was a simple and succinct description of the causes of suffering, the illusion of self, the boundlessness of everything. Here was liturgy and a whole way of life forming a time-honored path. Here was the mystery of birth and death faced explicitly. Here was Dharma. And yet, it took a while. A couple of years, I think, before I felt I had any real purchase on the path. Early experience had left me skeptical, and I needed to test the waters. I slipped in and out of serious practice, distracted by the persistence of responsibilities and the general busyness of my life. Occasionally, I would be overcome with doubt. My husband was not supportive. Nevertheless, I kept coming back, pushed by some mysterious inner conviction that the Buddha's fundamental message was the deepest possible truth for me, and pulled by the simple reality that this was a place unlike any I had known, a place of silence and of kindness, a true refuge. I sotaraksu, took Jukai, and became a student of Bodhin Roshi. The photo referenced above is of a wonderful sesshin, one of my first, and a moment from which I could never look back. As incredibly difficult as those first sessions were, as miserable and inadequate as I felt, trying to get the hang of Doksan, making mistakes at my work assignments, falling short of the mark on maintaining daily practice, nothing did or shake any conviction formed then that this is my path. After 20-some years of membership in the RZC Sangha, I think I can say the following 3 true for me things about my experience as a Zen woman with a lay practice who came late and sometimes reluctantly to faith. First, the way of Zen and its truth became embedded deep in me right from the first encounter. but it sometimes seemed just too difficult, both physically and emotionally, to actually do it. When it was hard and I was feeling inadequate, I tried to turn away. But it has been impossible for me to turn away from something this intimately true for me. Eventually I recognized that I have never really had any choice but to stay as engaged as I possibly can. Second, coming to the path for me has not been a once and done event. In the years since those early sessions, it has been an ongoing and a recursive experience of wayfinding, discovering again and again that right here is my true home. In going and returning, I have never left it, but I have learned that showing up is important. This public talk has been implicitly a vow to keep walking. Intellectual and artistic pursuits, yoga, therapy, meditation, Al-Anon, good and loving relationships, all have helped me clarify my understanding that this whole life is my path. But nothing has healed my spiritual deficit like the transcendent words of the Heart Sutra. Nothing grounds me like Master Hakuin's chant in praise of Zazen. Nothing sustains my sanity like daily Zazen. And there has been no refuge in my life as protective and nourishing as Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. In conclusion, I'd like to read the 23rd Psalm mentioned above. This version is from the Zen teacher Norman Fisher's little book called Opening to You, Zen-inspired translations of the Psalms. I understand the you in the Psalms as Buddha nature, mine and yours here today, or listening sometime, somewhere. Here it is. You are my shepherd, I am content. You lead me to rest in the sweet grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I am refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and your staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and in the long days beyond I will always live in your house. I hope you found something of interest here, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Yes, so we do have time for questions. We'll start with people here in the Zendo online, for people here in the Zendo, and then we'll check in online and see if anybody has comments or questions. Kanji.
Yeah, I'll offer more of a...
Oh, I'm sorry, one last thing. Make sure when you do speak, raise your voice, because Catherine's a little hard of hearing, and for people online as well.
Sorry, my voice is betraying me a little. I just was really touched by what you said about it being too difficult, and yet you kept coming back. That really resonates for me. I don't know if you have more to say about that, if other people do, but...
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult. It's a hard practice, especially for beginners. Bowden Roshi used to caution us not to read, but I would strongly recommend reading Catherine's book about coming to practice, because it's has lots of information about how to deal with those hardships. I wish I'd had it back in the day.
What book?
Finding Your Seat, the one you did with Mama Roshi.
Oh, I see.
Sorry, Kanji. Sorry, Kanji. I knew Kanji before she was Kanji.
Yeah, and that's the name.
And we were two Catherines. It is. It's a hard practice, I tried to escape from it, to tell you the truth. I found it so hard and so austere and my self-confidence and self-consciousness was so weak, I struggled for quite a long time. But it was impossible to turn away, so I gave up struggling eventually.
Yeah, Robin, go ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Neil.
Oh, Robin.
Oh.
Thank you. I just, so many things. First, this is my first Dharma talk like this, and I just am so grateful for it. I am in my 50s and just founded the Zen Center too. So I
Say again?
I'm in my 50s and just founded Zen Center. So I related to that part of your story, you know. I also wanted to say that it's so amazing that Margaret Atwood was your professor.
She didn't know she was Margaret Atwood then. She was just a young woman with a part-time professor job.
What an amazing life.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, you said you went to Sesshin and then, can't remember how you phrased it, but not as committed to daily practice or difficulty with the daily practice. And that's something that I'm struggling with right now. And I just wanted to know if you got through that or are you able to practice daily now? Or are you?
Yes, I have a long-standing daily practice, but it took years to establish it. But that's probably because of the way of my skepticism, and which sort of bordered on cynicism at times, and my doubts. But I understand that Zen it contains great faith and great doubt. It contains those things. And working with the physical part of it eventually gets you into a kind of a habit where the gradual improvement in my life was, I think, what convinced me that I sort of had to do this.
I understand.
And once I squarely faced having to do it, I started to do it. But I did look for lots of ways to avoid it.
Thank you.
Neil, go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, you mentioned your husband was not always supportive. And given the long history of the male dominance in Zen Buddhism, did you find it more difficult as a woman just to engage?
Well, I didn't, but it was problematic. And I was warned about that in the beginning, that sometimes if, and my husband, really was such a committed atheist and sort of I don't know, he must have had something in his biography that caused him to be so dubious and so negative about, I think at one point he said they're going to take all your time and all your money. So we used to argue about it, but nevertheless I kept going. So that part was difficult, but being a Zen woman in this community has not been a difficult thing.
Okay, I think we'll check with folks online. Sensei, is there anyone online who would like to say anything?
See no one moving. We can always go back to online if you find something develops. So let's go ahead and go back to the Zendo.
Yeah, go ahead.
I found your talk so touching. The difficult family of origin situation, the tour of Canada. I'm also Canadian American also, both coming from Concordia. I lived in Montreal 28 years and now I'm here. Thank you very much.
All right, unless there's someone online. Anything?
Nope, nothing online.
All right, thanks, Sensei. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine.